Hey everybody, it's Patrick Regan here from Kintsugi Hope. Coming live from sunny Essex. I'm here in my study. I've even got my dog here beside me. Here's Hope. Hey, come here. Hope, say hello. There's Hope. Look, there she is. Hope is a really stupid name for a dog. I know. My neighbours, when I shout out "No Hope" or "I've lost hope," get a little bit worried. But there you go. But today we're going to be chatting a little bit about well-being, and it's such an important topic given what's going on in our country, and it's just been such a privilege for me to be involved with Spring Harvest for so many years now, and we've done 3 sessions already on anxiety, depression, perfectionism, which you can watch online, which will unpack some of this stuff in a little bit more detail. I work for a charity called Kintsugi Hope, and a lot of people, when they struggle to pronounce that, are like, what on earth does Kintsugi mean? And basically, if you get a bowl, I've got this bowl here, and you crack it. I've just mended this. I don't know if you can see it, just slightly, with super glue. And the whole idea is in Japan, I guess super glue, the whole idea of super glue is you hide the cracks, right? So you can't see them. I haven't done a very good job there. And what they do in Japan is they put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. Arguably, the object becomes more beautiful than it was before. It certainly becomes more unique. There isn't a bowl like this on planet Earth. And I firmly believe that beauty comes out of brokenness. And our scars are not to be ashamed of. Our scars make us who we really are. And Kintsugi Hope exists to create safe and supportive spaces and tackle issues around mental health and well-being and social isolation. And we do this really, we have a 12-week course, groups that look at things like anger and perfectionism and anxiety, and they run in small groups, and we train churches up across the UK. We've got 176 leaders now and about 70 churches, and it's just been amazing. They've all moved online, obviously, via Zoom. And actually, for some people, it's a real lifeline. So it's a real privilege to be able to do that. This issue of well-being, then, is so important. And I think a lot of people get confused between mental ill health and well-being. You know, we all have mental health the way we have physical health. And if you look at someone, you know, what would definition of well-being be? It would be this, if you Googled it, the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. In fact, the New Economics Foundation say well-being can be understood as how people feel, how they function, both on a personal and social level, and how they evaluate their lives as a whole. It's about the whole. It's about spiritual, physical, emotional, mental well-being. It's looking at how can we be holistic. And if you look at anything around well-being and what are the 5 ways to well-being, you will find everywhere people talk about these 5 pathways. Number 1 is we're told a pathway to well-being is to connect with others. Number 2, be active. We've heard a lot, haven't we, in recent weeks about exercise and the importance of it. 3 is to take notice of your thoughts and the things that are happening in your life. Have an observer point of view. Number 4, keep learning. And number 5, give. And again, we've seen so many random acts of kindness and going on as well. So I was looking at these 5 things, and I was thinking about well-being, and I was thinking, out of those 5 things, connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give, what's been taken away by the coronavirus? And I realized that actually none of them. They just have to be done really differently. And we're under a huge amount of pressure in terms of well-being, but we can connect. It's not quite the same, but we can do it. We can be active at the moment. We can get out. We can take notice of what's going on. We can keep learning, and we can show acts of love and kindness. But I want to be really honest with you. It's the only way I can be. The coronavirus has affected my well-being and lots of people's well-being, and I think it's done it in a number of ways. One is, for a lot of us that struggle with anxiety, is our coping mechanisms have been taken away. For me, you know, I used to like going to the gym. I used to like going out to Costa Coffee down the road, meeting with my friends. I love my job. I absolutely love it. And, not being able to do that and not being with my work colleagues is really, really, really tough. And my anxiety is triggered. And I struggle a little bit with health anxiety. And worrying about my friends. You know, my sister's an ITU nurse, so she's on the front line. My mum's a hospice nurse. My daughter is working in a care home as a cleaner. And you know, those of us that struggle with anxiety, we go to worst case scenario thinking quite quickly. And there's been two things that have helped me in my well-being over these last couple of weeks. And the first one is simply this, is I've had to accept that this is going to be really tough for me. I've had to accept that, you know what, I've said it so many times, it's okay not to be okay. And a little quick bit of theology for you. You know, Jeremiah 29 verse 11, the most famous verse, I have plans to prosper you, to give you future, and to give you hope. You know, that was written to people in exile. That was written to people that felt abandoned, orphaned, homeless. In fact, the book of Lamentations describes how these people felt orphaned and vulnerable. And the context of that verse actually is there's a prophet, Hananiah, who says, you know what, guys, your exile is going to be over in 2 years. And Jeremiah comes along and goes, you know what, it's not 2 years, it's 70 years. But I've got plans for you, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. You know, build gardens, settle down. In other words, you've got to accept the situation that you're in. But I've come to realize that acceptance and resignation are two really different things. Resignation is I quit, I can't do it anymore. Acceptance is the first place of healing. So accepting actually that this is tough for a lot of people, and for all different reasons. My hero, Desmond Tutu, says this: we're meant to live in joy. This does not mean that our life will be easy or painless. It means that we turn our faces to the wind and accept that this is a storm we must pass through. We cannot exceed by denying what exists. The acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. There's a fascinating bit of research done by Harvard on how to survive a concentration camp, and I'm not comparing this to a concentration camp at all. But they said it's really interesting that those that went in with optimism, positive thinking, died quite quickly. Those that accepted the situation they were in often made it through. Obviously, not all of them, but a lot of them did. And I think acceptance is really, really key at the moment. The second key thing for me is dealing with guilt. The shoulds, the must, I oughts. And, you know, I should be able to cope. What's wrong with me? I've got a good team. For heaven's sake, I run a wellbeing charity. I must pull myself together. I ought to be stronger. And I don't know about you, but I've got guilt coming out my ears. You know, my kids, I've got 4 kids. I'm a bit worried that one of them will burst in a tantrum in a minute. But, you know, screen time. You know what? Screen time was hard enough to manage without the coronavirus. Now it's almost impossible. And I'm like, I've got to entertain my kids all the time, and homeschooling. You know, Daniel's maths homework, I'm not even sure I can do it. And it's tough. And then there's the guilt that comes from work. You know, I feel like sometimes I'm just not doing enough, and I need to do more. And yet I'm juggling so many things. And then you go to social media, don't you? And everyone's learning a new language and a new skill. There is never any winning comparison, and it's really, really tough. We don't need to make the most of a pandemic. And you know, one thing that I'm learning and learning again, and I think it's the key to well-being actually, is this thing about self-compassion. And self-compassion and self-indulgence are two really different things. And I used to think self-compassion was bubble baths and candles, you know, and I'm a bloke, I don't really do that. But I realized that self-compassion is talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your best friend. You know, most of you will know Abby Guinness. She's hiding away somewhere, and she's been hosting, and she's a friend of mine. And if Abby came up to me and was like, you know what, Patrick, you know, I'm tired, the kids are doing it, you know, challenging, and I'm not sleeping well, and this has happened at work, and I would go, come on, man up a little bit, you know, come on, seriously, stop whinging. There's so many other people that got it harder than you know. I wouldn't dream of talking like Abby like that, because I think she's genuinely a friend of mine, a beautiful human being. But I tell you who I talk to like that every single day, me, and totally beating myself up. And I think that actually what we need to do in this time is we need to lower some of our standards. And so we need to grapple well-being. We need to connect. How do we do it? How do we be active? How do we take notice? How do we keep learning? And how do we give kindness? We're going to start taking your questions in a second. And you know, the thing is this, I want to leave us with this verse from Lamentations before we start taking some questions, because I think it's a really beautiful verse. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fails, for they are new every morning. Great is their faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. I'm going to introduce you to Sue. Sue is going to be on the live chat for me. Sue is the chair of the Association of Christian Counsellors. Sue, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you do?
Hi, yeah, so my name's Sue. It's lovely to be with you today. As Patrick said, I'm the chair of the Association of Christian Counsellors. And we're a professional body of counsellors that holds a government register of counsellors. We're the only faith body to do that. And we have about 850 or so counsellors throughout the UK who are working in a professional way. And what holds us together is that we are all Christians, but working in many different ways. I guess I've been counselling for about 25 plus years, and I've been at Spring Harvest probably for about that similar time. I'd normally be running a pastoral team there with my husband. And we're also involved in running retreats and just trying to equip the church really in how to live well, to have congregations that actually get well-being and that care for each other and care well for the people around them.
That's fantastic, Sue. Thank you so much. And in terms of the, well-being, and from your experience, what do you think some of the keys to well-being are?
So I think a lot of well-being does come back to that sense of how do we care for ourselves, and I think actually we live in a society that says it's all about doing and achieving and it's not about being. And I think as Christians we take that almost one step further, and often we were commanded to love our neighbour as ourselves, but often we actually love our neighbour instead of ourselves. And so we tend to neglect our own well-being. We tend to see that as not being important, and that we don't listen to the commandment of Jesus. He actually took it as a prerequisite that we knew how to care for ourselves well before we then cared for others. And I think in years of counselling, a big thing that you have to work with is how people do care well for themselves, and how they value themselves as well. And all of that contributes to our well-being physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, relationally. If we don't know how to care for ourselves, if we don't value ourselves well enough, then we kind of neglect all of that well-being thing.
Yeah, and that's really important, isn't it? I remember someone said to me, you can't give out of an empty cup. And
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes you feel like, for the kingdom, you sacrifice everything, don't you, and stuff. And sometimes you feel like it's selfish, but actually it's not. It's about doing what Jesus commanded us to do, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I think that's really important. We got a question of a couple who are struggling with anxiety. They've both lost their jobs due to the current situation. What advice would you give them with anxiety, Sue?
So I guess the first thing is, obviously there's the very practical stuff about how do you manage the reality of the situation that you're in. We can't, in the situation that many of us are in, we can't change the situation that well, but it's how do we manage ourselves in it. And so I think the very practical stuff around finances, around who do you go to, what organisations can you go to for help to manage potentially financial stuff is really important. But then I think in terms of managing anxiety, there's often two levels of managing anxiety. One is, what do I do in the immediate moment when my anxiety seems to be going out of complete control? And then how do I actually lower my level of anxiety on an ongoing basis? So there's very good stuff around what do I do in those emergency moments, which is the whole kind of breathing exercises, grounding exercises, because it's all about which part of your brain is in control, really. And when you're in anxiety, it tends to not be your thinking brain, it's your reacting brain. And so there's a lot of stuff which is about getting you back into using the part of your brain that isn't catastrophizing, that isn't going into sort of overload of anxiety, really. But then there's other things about actually how do I keep on a daily basis my level of anxiety lower? And we need to be very realistic. You know, we might get told, you know, go and meditate and do this for an hour a day, and that just isn't practical. But very, very kind of, just if you can find things that calm you, just do them for 5-10 minutes at a time, because it's all about actually bringing yourself into a place where you're not pushed into those extremes of anxiety so much. So it could be reading, it could be listening to music, it could be just walking around if you've got a small garden, but doing it all slowly. That kind of real just calming stuff really does help, but you have to practice it, I'm afraid. Well-being is a discipline. It's not a one-off crisis moment thing all the time.
And I think I really want to say, you know, anxiety isn't weakness. And I think sometimes that I always think of anxiety a little bit as my mate describes it as a car alarm. You know, we need anxiety for life. Actually, we're made to feel anxious. It's part of our response to things. But if the car alarm's going off all the time, it's a bit annoying for you and for everyone else. And it's so, like, how do we create a culture? How do we create an environment where actually we're learning that the car alarm isn't going off all the time? And I think that is so hard, because one size never fits all. And I realize sometimes in the church that, you know, we just simply said, struggle with anxiety, you just need to trust God more, and as if you've never thought of that. And actually, I've worked out the people that I've met over the last couple of years that struggle with anxiety are normally beautiful, courageous, sensitive, wonderful people, who actually have a sensitivity and an empathy with others that I don't always have. And, you know, and I think since I've struggled with anxiety, I've had more empathy and I'm less judgmental than I used to be. And so I want to encourage you that I appreciate it's really hard and it's really tough, but, you know, there is something that you have to offer, and that you have to give. And I know for me, one of the things that I've struggled with anxiety is just how to handle the really sort of, I think Sue said, you know, the catastrophizing thoughts, the all or nothing things. And my mate described it a little bit like this. He said, if you imagine those thoughts as trains coming into a train station, you know, we often misquote a verse in Corinthians as Christians, which talks about taking captive every thought. I always heard preachers preach on that, and I was terrified that every time a thought came into my head, I needed to bash it in the name of Jesus with a Bible verse. And we all know that the more you try not to think about something, what happens? The more you think about it, right? Because whatever you resist persists. Carl Jung said that, the famous psychologist. And so he said this, I found it really helpful. He said that if you imagine your thoughts as trains coming into the train station, and you know, you could stand at the train and go, train in the name of Jesus, you're not going to come. It's probably still going to come. But he said maybe if they're taking captive every thought is deciding whether you're going to get on the train or not. Maybe it's that pause, that sense of, is this actually what God says about me? Is this true? You know, get another voice, an alternative voice, and a voice from a friend, someone that loves you, someone that cares about you. And that sometimes can help. But it's Sue's right. It takes discipline. It is hard. So please go gently. That would be really, really good. We have another question here. A Rev who had a breakdown was told by a senior that they had no right to have suicidal thoughts. This is a massive issue, isn't it, Sue? Around often advice that's given to people. I know, having done stuff at Spring Harvest before, I've had people come up to me and go, I've been told that depression is a sin. I've been told that I don't have enough faith. I've been told that I need to trust God more. And actually, you know, just so unhelpful in so many ways. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, to tell someone that you're not allowed to have suicidal thoughts, I mean, when often people have got suicidal thoughts, they're struggling with an immense amount of guilt and stuff anyway. And then for someone to tell you you're not allowed to think that way, there are no, we struggle with the shoulds and the oughts. And Christians are very good at putting the shoulds and the oughts onto each other. If you've got suicidal thoughts, you've got them. Doesn't mean that they're lovely to have, and they're certainly not, but you've got them. Saying that I shouldn't have them is not ever going to make them go away. And sometimes when we're at that point, actually just owning that's how I really feel can be the first the first step, really. If you read a lot of sort of information from people that have talked and attempted suicide, they say, if only someone had been honest with me and asked me, are you thinking about suicide, it would
Yeah.
have made all the difference. But I think we're scared of it, as individuals, and so we try to push it away. We try to sort of pretend that people shouldn't have it. But if you're in that dark, deepest pit of suicide, you want someone that's actually going to acknowledge, yeah, this is real.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it has to end up in suicide, but it's real. And just have someone that will sit with you and be with you in that reality,
Yeah.
and not give you platitudes and not give you this is what the Bible says, but just actually really enter into this is how black it is at the moment. And then it's just clasping onto just the tiniest hope, really, is what will get you through in the end. But yeah, don't ever say to someone you shouldn't have them as a Christian. Christians have suicidal thoughts. People in the Bible had suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's
We
so
have to
true.
live with it.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, I wrote this book called Honesty Over Silence, and there was this beautiful couple called Alan and Jackie Slough, and they won't mind me telling their story, but they had a 16-year-old son who completed a suicide. And I use the word completed because the word commit, often it was an offence to commit a suicide. And so completed a suicide is a better way of talking about it. And I said to them, you know, they wrote a chapter about their story. Why write the chapter? It must bring up some painful stuff within. And they went, you know what, 6,500 people in this country complete suicides every single year. Not talking about this stuff isn't helping. And we need to talk about it. And every single day on our railways, up until recently, obviously there's been people completing suicides. And I think for me, I got really, really, really low at one point. And you start to believe that the world would be better off if you weren't here. And I don't think that's a selfish thing. I think it's a really tough, lonely, painful place to be. And you know, reality, you've got to talk, you've got to find someone you trust, and it's hard, and sometimes it might have to be a stranger, it might have to be a helpline, but you've got to get some help and get a different perspective. It's really, really, really tough to do that, but I think it's so important. We've got to be more honest. You know, Brené Brown says we are living in the most medicated, addicted, obese cohort in the whole of history. So not talking about stuff isn't helping. We need to have a culture where people can talk about some of these things. Another question that's come in is around tips on looking after your own mental health when you're responsible for looking after the well-being of others. And again, this is a brilliant question, and I'll let you answer it in a second. So I just want to say one thing though. You know, I went through some major surgery on my legs for a number of years, and it took, I don't know, 2 years to recover. And the interesting thing is everyone cared for me, which was lovely. And but my wife Diane literally had to change from being my spouse to being my carer. I had a big frame around my leg. I couldn't walk. It had to be cleaned every day. I had to be stretched every day. Hospital appointment after hospital appointment after hospital appointment, blood tests, x-rays, loads of pain management stuff. And the fascinating thing is that she really started to struggle. And in fact, in one of my books, When Faith Gets Shaken, she wrote a chapter called Secondhand Smoke. And the whole idea is secondhand smoke can still kill you. And so often the attention's on the person that was struggling, which was me, and which is, you know, fair enough. But I do think we need to really think, how do we care for the carers? And I'm guessing this question is coming from someone who is having to really care for others, but at the same time is seeing their own well-being start to be affected. And I know for Diane, one of the things that she often talks about is when I came home from hospital, it was just all too difficult. And I was sort of left there on the sofa, and she was given like a tray of medication and told to get on with it, you know. And she went to her bedroom. It's my bedroom as well. And she said, God, I can't do this anymore. And you know that saying, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. She said, I felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And she just felt God say, stop looking for the light at the end of the tunnel and start looking around you now. start looking at the love of your friends and your neighbours and those random acts of kindness and those little things in your life, little pockets of light beaming through. And she said her way of handling it was actually she just had to take a day at a time. And sometimes I was hard work. It was an hour at a time, and being in the moment and realizing your needs, I think is so important. So bless you if you're in that situation, and I'm sure many people are at the moment, caring for kids who are struggling with anxiety, caring, not knowing any certainty of when this might end. So what would your tips be for someone looking after their own mental well-being?
Okay, so I think what often people find when they're carers is that they lose the sense of who they are, and
Yeah,
they become the carer. So they're real. So it's so easy for us to become the carer and not to hold on to our own identity. And I think that's really important for our mental well-being and our general well-being. So even if it's only 2 minutes a day, do something that is really for you and just for you. And it can be, something really simple, but hold on to that sense of I'm doing this for me as me, not for me as so-and-so's carer or the caring role that I'm in. And just try to, and also think about that whole oxygen mask thing. When you're on a plane, you're always told, make sure you've got your oxygen mask on before you attend to the dependents or children. And so just imagine that on a daily basis, always, where am I getting my bit of oxygen from today? And just take some time out to do something, whether it's just sitting and having a cup of coffee really slowly, or locking yourself in the loo and just reading a book for 10 minutes or something. But you just need to, it's just having something that's for you, something that says that you're still important as who you are. There is I and my husband recorded a seminar, which I think is up on Spring Harvest website now, about self-care, caring for those in caring roles. So we explore that a lot more in there, but it is this whole sense of doing what's practical, but making sure you do something for yourself, that your identity is who you are, that you value yourself for who you are, in the middle of trying to care for people that will be draining. And so again, as Patrick said earlier about that empty cup, where are you getting your input from? And get it regularly. Don't get to the point of where you burn out before you actually try to look for some input for yourself.
Yeah, I've the phrase that really helped me. I think it was on the news, and it was this: "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good." And I think for me, it's about how do I lower my standards a little bit. And I think sometimes I put huge pressure for everything to be perfect, particularly trying to homeschool my kids, which is like chaos sometimes. We have a daughter that has additional needs, and she needs one-on-one a lot of the time, and I get that this affects people so differently. I know there's people lonely and, desperately want company and stuff, but I feel like that sense of actually don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think that's so important. And I thought what would be nice now is I did a talk earlier on perfectionism, which again is a huge driver to my anxiety, actually, because I think sometimes it's really good to look at what the root causes of some of these things are. And for me, it was definitely perfectionism that drove my anxiety, that drove my depression a few years back. And I think in this time we are setting ourselves some very high standards. So here's literally a 2-minute video that explores a little bit of what perfectionism is and how to cope with it. It's coming up soon.
Perfectionism means having unrealistic expectations and thinking and feeling negatively when those expectations aren't met. Perfectionism exists in everyone to some degree, and it comes in 3 flavours. Expecting yourself to be perfect. This won't mean you work hard and perform better, it means lots of unnecessary anxiety and worry. Expecting others to be perfect. This can impact negatively on your relationships. Who wants to be around someone who's demanding and unhappy with you all the time? Or thinking other people, like a parent, teacher or coach, expects you to be perfect. Believing others only like you if you perform, look or behave the way they want is the worst flavour. Some have a mix of flavours, some have lots, others a little, but most are somewhere in between, and it can impact negatively on your mental health. The consequences depend on what flavour and how much of it you have. Too much and things start to get stressful, like wearing a heavy backpack that gets heavier until you can't carry it anymore. Wanting to be good at things is great. Wanting to be perfect just makes the backpack heavier. The amount of perfectionism in young people is increasing. However, you can put the heavy backpack down. If you think perfectionism is impacting your mental health, speak to someone you trust, like a parent, teacher, or coach. They'll help you get the support you need. If you just want to know how to be a little less critical of yourself and others, perhaps learn how to enjoy things a little more, here are 3 top tips. 1. Don't base your self-esteem on how you perform. Instead, try to feel good about things you have more control over, such as being a kind person or how hard you work. 2. Cut yourself some slack. No one's perfect. Mistakes happen. When they do, focus on the positives. 3. Getting things done is better than getting things perfect. Try not to put things off and avoid overthinking. When it's done, it's done.
I hope you enjoyed that little video. I find that really helpful in describing what perfectionism is. And I think the whole thing about our standards, it's not that trying our best is wrong. It's exactly that God looks for our best. He doesn't look for perfection. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. And, I've been really challenging myself recently around what does success look like for me as a dad and as a leader. And I realized that my success for me is living in line with my values, and my values have got to be for me about relationship, about treating people well, about honesty, authenticity, generosity. And if I can live by my values, then that's success. And I think that in this period of time that we're going through is so important. Struggling does not mean you're a failure. It means you're a human being. And I think we really need to communicate that in a really key time at the moment. I've got another question here. Patrick, did you find that people were more sympathetic to your physical operations than your mental health issues? And yes, I think it's definitely the answer to that. And because you can see it. And I think the challenge actually is when some people try and do this helpfully, they compare physical health to mental health. If you break your leg and you're a young person, it's a clean break, the likelihood is you're going to be okay in 6 weeks, maybe a bit longer. Mental health, it can take such a long time to learn how to manage it, to go through a long process. And I found that people could be incredibly judgmental, and it made me feel a bit like a failure at times. And I read a lot around you probably heard of Brené Brown. She's an amazing research professor in the States. And I used to keep it all hidden. And still now, like, there's a temptation, just to keep it all hidden. And her big thing was around courage and vulnerability. And she said courage and vulnerability are the same thing. And in fact, the Latin word for courage is cur. It means to speak your mind with your heart. And I realized that I was really struggling with feeling ashamed of my mental health challenges. And she went on to say that shame loves silence, secrecy, and judgment. It has 2 gremlins. Who do you think it are? And you're not enough. And I realized that a lot of my freedom from some of my mental health challenges came when I was honest, and people loved me anyway. And I spoke about it. And I found that being honest allowed other people to be honest, because honesty always breeds more honesty and more reality. And I think it opens the door for others. And that's what Kintsugi Hope does. The groups are safe places where people come every single week and they're honest and they talk about issues that are affecting them. One of the issues I struggled with was anger. I was really angry. I felt it was really unfair of what I was going through. My kids were ill. My dad had cancer, and there was so much going on. I call it the Tetris moment in life, where it all feels like, remember the game Tetris? It all feels like it's crumbling at the same time, and it's just too much. And I realized that, you know what, it's okay not to be okay, and you really do need to be honest and vulnerable with people. And as you own your story, actually you step out of shame. And I think that's really, really important, that people can own their story, and to be real and to be honest. We've got another question here, Sue, that I'd like you to think about. Is how do we pray for people that are facing anxiety? I think that's a really good question, particularly at the moment. A lot of our country is in that place of facing anxiety. How should we pray into that and for people?
So I think if we're, I mean, the whole thing of of what are we trying to do when we're praying for people with anxiety, is one, I guess, perhaps to pray that the situations that they're in that are causing them anxiety, pray for God to intervene and to change them. But for them personally, it's to pray that sense of peace, really, for them for their physical body, their brain, their mental capacity to just be quietened, really, and that sense of being led to still waters and to be allowed to lie down. So to pray for peace for their minds, peace for their bodies. And I think also a sense of praying for some, that's that little chink of hope, really, and that little chink of light. Doesn't need to be great, but just that somewhere in, because anxiety is sort of quite cyclical. We go round and round and round in circles, and to pray for people to just somehow see a little break in that circle, really, so that there's something beyond what they're trapped in with anxiety. But so peace, to pray for hope, to pray for a sense of God to just calm their fears, really. If we're probably not likely to be doing it face to face, but if we're praying for people that have got anxiety, let's be very calm when we pray. Let's be very quiet in how we speak. Let's not get all excited about it. We're not going to command anxiety to go or any of that stuff, because it really doesn't work. Let's ask them things like, would it help if they kept their eyes open? Because sometimes when you're anxious and you're asked to close your eyes while someone prays with you, your mind just whirs off. Perhaps they need to concentrate on an object or something. So when we're praying with people, let's create a calm, quiet environment. But let's also when we pray for people, not with them, it's around peace. It's around a chink of hope, and it's around God being a sense of God holding them. I think that sense of no matter where you're feeling, God is holding you and surrounding you, and even if it seems impossible, somehow He is still in control. So that would be the kind of, and listen to them. A lot of when we pray with people is actually about listening to them. We're journeying with them. We're not praying for something to happen to them necessarily. So just being still and listening is as an important part of prayer as what we say often.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely vital. I feel like being really non-judgmental as well. I think that I think my temptation a little bit is when someone's struggling with something like anxiety, and I know that this happened to me so many times, is people with the best intentions in the world want to fix you, and they want to work out why you're struggling with anxiety. And sometimes I think it's about coming alongside. And, you know, I'm always amazed by the story of Jesus and the Emmaus Road. I just think it's incredible that the day after Jesus' resurrection, there was no marketing strategy. There was no feeding of the 5,000. There was that Jesus spent the morning walking alongside to heartbroken people. And the thing I find fascinating about the story, as he walks alongside, he lets them talk. He doesn't go, guys, on the way, no need to worry, I'm Jesus. We don't need to have this conversation anymore. You know, woohoo. He doesn't say that. He allows them to talk. You know, they're heartbroken, they're disillusioned. They wanted a military Messiah coming to bring, to get rid of the Romans. And it hasn't worked out the way it should. And so, you know, he walked alongside them. And then after that, the fascinating thing is he didn't even then say, I'm the Messiah. He starts telling the big story. he starts telling about the story of God and the Old Testament and the prophets. And then they have this meal, and Jesus breaks the bread. And I love the fear that brokenness reveals who Jesus is. And they get it, and they understand. But I think it's that sense of walking alongside, being non-judgmental, being those people that come alongside. And I often say to our group leaders, there's nothing more loving than you can do than to tell someone about the love of Jesus. My issue is how, and to do it in a way that actually is Christ-like in that sense. And I feel like, this is an opportunity for the church, and I feel like it's a real challenge. I think that being online for some people is really tough, and it can be anxiety inducing as well. And so I think kindness is the way. They say that kindness is the best drug. So in your prayers, be kind. Be kind in the way that you communicate is so important. We're getting a lot of questions around the current lockdown. Any advice with struggling? I am so aware for a lot of people, home isn't a safe place, actually. It can be a very vulnerable place. And I know from my job, my previous job, that I had to deal with lots of issues around this. And I think that, to be really, really clear, I think that actually, if there are situations which are potentially difficult, violent, you need to get help. And there are lots of numbers around this that can help you, and that you're not on your own. And you need to have a way of clicking that exit button, of trying to get help as soon as you can. And I would really encourage you to do that. And Sue, what would your be advice for people who are in tough home situations at the moment, potentially?
Yeah. I think if home really isn't safe, if there is real danger to you or to people that you're living with, to children, then I never underestimate how much courage it takes to make a phone call, how difficult it is to do that. But it really is a place where you can't be for forever. And so if you're really in danger, then then please do make a phone call. There's refuge lines, there's helplines that you can ring that will get help to you. But generally, I think we all need to also acknowledge that all of us being confined in a home will rise conflict. We all talk about the stresses of Christmas Day, but that's one day and we only have to do it once a year. We're in a place now where we're doing that for we don't know how long. And so just if it's just general sort of family conflicts, I'm going to say there's another seminar that we've done around relationships and conflict, but that sense of being real about it and trying to actually work out what is it that causes the tension, how do we actually disperse it before it gets too much. But if you are in danger, or home really doesn't seal for place, then please do call someone. Don't just stick it out. Don't think it's going to be okay necessarily, but get the help you need.
I think that one of the things I haven't heard loads of people speaking on all the different videos that leaders are doing online, and which are great. But I think this issue around anger is a really important issue, and anger in the Bible, I hardly heard of anyone preach on anger apart from Jesus and the money changers, which is the only time I hear it spoken about. But anger isn't wrong. Anger is an emotional response to pain. It's what you do with your anger. And Ecclesiastes talks about anger being a visitor but never a resident. And I think that working out ways to control anger, to not suppress it, but to release it. One of the things I do is I journal. We have a shameless plug, Kintsugi journal with CWR. I journal loads. I don't do it every day, but I am getting stuff down on paper. The Psalms, 40% of the Psalms are laments. They're David crying out to God. I just don't get it at the moment. And actually, I think that's really important. The role of lament is really important at this time. And grieving as well. I think that, it's important to grieve well. And that's really hard when life is just changing so much. And anger is an emotional response to pain. It is a normal reaction. And I've noticed that in my kids, actually. They're quite angry the fact that they can't go out and spend time with their friends, and it's bottling away. And so I've been trying to make sure I'm getting out with my son and getting him on the bike and getting him out there and talking about stuff, and learning how to handle this in a really appropriate way is going to be really important. We've got another question here around judgment for taking medication to manage anxiety. Again, that's something I've struggled with, and I have to say, I think it's a little bit nuts, and I don't see why we would take medication for a physical problem and not have a problem with it. And yet, if we have a chemical imbalance, we have a mental health problem, that would be really so judgmental about taking it for that reason. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think medication is the answer to everything. Actually, getting the right medication sometimes can be really hard. And and all the research suggests actually that medication with counselling, with help, with therapeutic help, is probably one of the best ways of getting through it. Because obviously the counselling and the therapeutic help often deal with some of the root issues, but there should be no judgment. There should be no judgment in taking medication. In fact, actually, I would say, if you've gone to the doctor and you have sought care for yourself, and you've decided then with the doctor and with people around you that is the right course to take for the moment, that should be applauded, because that takes courage, actually. But I think equally, I think the role of other interventions are really, really important. Sue, obviously you do the Association of Christian Counsellors, and you guys must be seeing this all the time around this question of medication and whether you should take it or not.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, exactly what you said. Whatever is the cause of our anxiety or our depression, it is the result or the cause of it are chemical imbalances, chemical disruption in our bodies. So the same as if I have diabetes, which is the fact that I'm not producing the chemicals that I need to control my body, I would take my insulin every day. Exactly the same for anxiety and stress and depression. There is a physical, chemical, bodily change, and drugs will help address that. And certainly, as a counsellor, I would always encourage my clients to go and talk to their GP. If they're on medication, then that's fine. We work. Sometimes it actually means that you can actually get people into a stable enough place to work on other stuff and causes, but to deny people or to tell people that they're wrong to take medication, I find that truly worrying as a counsellor. We want people to be physically and mentally well, and that involves drugs, and it involves therapy, and it involves all the other wellbeing stuff we've talked about. It isn't one or the other, it's the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, just on a little bit of a side, I know that for me, when I was really struggling and I went on medication, and again, I think for a Christian, again, it's hard to know who to talk to. It's hard to know, and I was sort of doing a lot of stuff on TV and all that sort of stuff, and everyone was like, I was like, if they knew what I was really like. And I read a book. A friend of mine, John Sutherland, who's a great mate of mine, he's written some amazing books. He said, "Have you heard of this book called The Curse of the Strong? Depression, Curse of the Strong?" And I was like, "No, I've never heard of it." And the psychiatrist who wrote it said that 9 times out of 10, he could tell you what the personal characteristics of someone who is suffering depression. Not every time, but 9 times out of 10, he said the personal characteristics of someone struggling with depression are these: moral strength, reliability, diligence, strong conscience, a strong sense of responsibility, a tendency to focus on the needs of others before one's own, sensitivity, vulnerable to criticism, self-esteem dependent on the evaluation of others. Doesn't sound like a weak person. In fact, sounds like someone you'd like as your best friend. And he said the people that struggled with this: Winston Churchill, Vincent van Gogh, Mother Teresa. And people, I realized for a lot of people that anxiety, panic attacks, depression are not signs of weakness, they're signs of trying to remain strong for too long. And so if you've been trying to remain strong for too long, then and getting help, whether it's medication, whether that's counselling, whether that's peer support, and that is so, so important. Just got one more question here around anxiety again. And just to say, I did do a talk called Tackling Anxiety, which I know it's been seen quite a few times, but again, that might go into more detail, might be helpful. It says this, how do we deal with people not taking anxiety seriously if you don't have an official diagnosis? Again, Sue, you guys must come across this all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry, if I said to you that my back was hurting, I wouldn't necessarily have an official diagnosis,
No.
but I'd know what my body was telling me. And I know a lot of the time we don't listen to our bodies, but I would know, and it wouldn't be for someone else to tell me, well, because the doctor hasn't told you you've got a bad back, you can't possibly have one. You know what your body is. And I think it is challenging, sometimes challenging people with those physical comparisons, because they just would not say it to someone that said, I've got a bad back, or I've pulled a muscle in my leg. You just accept it, whether the doctor had diagnosed it or not. And we don't need, yes, we might want to go to the GP, but we all know. And I think that's the other thing. We all have anxious moments. It's not about the out there, someone else has it. We all are in times when we will have anxious moments. And let's own that I would challenge anyone that says I've never been anxious. Of course, we've all been anxious, and we don't need a diagnosis to per se say that we've got anxiety. We might need an diagnosis to help us get better and to get through it, but compare it to the physical. We don't have to have a diagnosis for everything we feel physically, but we trust and we believe people when they tell us. I just want to look back. There's a question about freeze moments. So we often talk about fight and flight when we talk about anxiety and we talk about traumatic incidents and things. Freeze is a very similar thing. It's another way. There's freeze and submit. And fight, flight, freeze and submit are all ways of dealing with anxious moments. And they are God-given ways of getting us through anxiety. So it will just be a way, almost the body saying, I can't deal with this, I'm shutting down for a bit until it passes. The way to get yourself back out of a freeze moment is, I talked a bit earlier about which part of the brain are you using, and it's getting that thinking function, the front bit of your brain, back working again. And so when you're in a freeze moment, you might want to change your physical position. You might want to have something like a stone or something that's in your pocket that you can just feel, something tactile to do. Because what you're trying to do is to get yourself from using the back bit of your brain, which says panic, something's happening, into the front bit of your brain, which says, actually, we're in control of this. So freeze is exactly all of the techniques that work around kind of the fight flight things will potentially work for freeze as well. It's just a different way of reacting. It's a God-given way to get you through an anxious moment, but it's getting you back into the right bit of your brain. So I think on one of my talks, there's talks about grounding techniques, and they're certainly available on the ACC website and Spring Harvest on some resources. But yeah, so just getting yourself back, but it's a normal reaction, but it's getting yourself back into a functioning place as opposed to a reacting place, really.
Thanks, Sue, so much for all your wisdom. We're just going to watch a short video clip now. This is the Kintsugi clip, just explaining some of the well-being stuff that's going on. And I wanted to mention a few other people who might be able to help, and then just have a couple of closing thoughts to maybe help us through the next couple of weeks in terms of our well-being, which we haven't mentioned so far. So here we go. Check this out. It's literally 60 seconds. Brilliant. Well, that's a little bit about the Kintsugi wellbeing stuff. And if that can help you or your church, please get in touch with us at Kintsugi Hope. We're getting churches signing up all the time. Because actually, you know, a lot of our neighbours and communities are all in WhatsApp groups. And so to say to them, you know, we're doing something online that could really help you at this time with self-management tools and peer support and things like that. You know, Sue obviously has already mentioned the Association of Christian Counsellors again. Great information there. CWR, who many of you would be aware of, they have some things called the Insight books. We do a lot of work, CWR, looking at anxiety, depression, perfectionism, anger. They're all available from their website. And so you can check that out. The book that I've been using a lot is called Honesty Over Silence. Again, you can get that from us or from Eden. I think supporting Christian bookshops at this time, so important. I know St Andrews, there's loads of brilliant people that do this, and when faith gets shaken as well, that might help. So I said about 5 ways of well-being, really important. The 5 ways of well-being. One is connect. You know, I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to text a couple of people a day and just say, just checking in, just seeing how you're doing. And actually, I think phone calls, as much as I love Zoom, I think an old-fashioned phone call actually now and again would be a good move, and to really listen to how someone's doing. One of my favourite quotes of all time is Maya Angelou, who says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So let's be kind, let's connect, and be active. Let's exercise, let's get out there for walks, let's cycle, let's do the things that we can do. Take notice, journal, you know, take notice of some of those thoughts that you're going through. Keep learning was the 4th one. That's a hard one, but we are learning so much through this period. And kindness. Let's give kindness to one another. A couple of the things that helped me personally, which I haven't heard many people talk about, and I know it's just me, is I've been listening to old hymns every night, which is not something I've ever done before. But it's actually been really helpful for me, because it's been like these hymns are written sometimes in war times, in times of poverty and slavery. And for me, it's like I'm attaching myself to God's big story. You know, Brian McLaren described once that this is the story we find ourselves, the Bible, the story we find ourselves in. We are part of this story. And for me, listening to songs like Great Is Your Faithfulness and It Is Well With My Soul and When I Survey has been a lovely thing to do before bed. I light a candle each day. I remember that proverb, it's greater to light a candle than curse the darkness. Psalms, you know, Psalms have been read through some of the darkest times in history. I find it so moving, people in concentration camps quoting Psalms at the end of the day. The other thing I'd like to say is be offline sometimes. You know, it makes me think that some of us have been saying for years that being online all the time is bad for your mental health, and now we're all saying be online. It's good to be online, it's good to connect, but actually order a book, you know, get some time offline. And realize that actually, like I said before, struggling doesn't mean you're failing, it means you're human. I'm finished by telling you a story. My little girl, Abby, she has some additional needs, and we read to her at night time. This is her favourite book. It's called Drafts Can't Dance. And throughout the book, it tells the story of Gerard. Now, Gerard is a giraffe, as you can see. And what happens is he goes to the jungle dance, and he can't dance like everyone else. So everyone takes the mickey out of him, and he goes away really despondent. And as he walks away, he comes into contact with a cricket, as you do. And the cricket says, "What's wrong?" And he basically says, "You know what? Everyone's laughing at me because I can't dance." And actually, what the cricket says to him is, "You know what? You can dance. You're just dancing to the wrong tune." And so the cricket gets out his violin, and he starts to play. And after a while, Gerald just starts to dance. He starts to go absolutely crazy. He starts to forget about the things around him. And he starts to really, really enjoy himself. In fact, he does it so much that everyone else starts to join in. As we put the book down, Diane was reading it to Abby. And Abby said to her, "You know what, Mum? That story is all about me." And she was like, "What do you mean, darling?" And she said, "You know what? I can do all things. I just have to do them completely different to everyone else." And I think that's true. You know, the fact is that at the moment, it's really hard because we can't do the things we used to do, we can't do. Well-being is tough in this environment. We need to accept that fact, and we need to resist guilt and perfectionism. and hopefully some of the things that me and Sue have spoken about would be really, really, really key. It's really important to invest in our well-being. Actually, I should mention Ruth Rice from Renewed Wellbeing as well. They do an amazing job. You should connect with their stuff. Loads of wellbeing stuff on there. Ruth's a lovely, amazing person. I want to finish by reading this verse. This is Romans 8, verse 16, and it simply says this: God's Spirit touches our spirit and confirms who we really are. We know who He is, and we know who we are, Father and children. God bless you as you journey through this time, and let's keep being a community together. And please, if you're watching this, all the resources are on the links below, and you can check them out. But we really appreciate your time. Sue, thank you so much for all your wisdom and over this last hour. God bless you, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime.